Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. My name is Sam Koslowski.
I'm Billi FitzSimons, and I'm definitely not cool enough to be doing this podcast.
Hey, come on, we haven't even gotten into it yet. But yes, as you'll find out, that's exactly what's happening. Billi, what's cooler than being cool? No, it's not ice cold. It's...
Is it telling bad jokes?
It's something like that. But we do know how to answer that question a little bit better now than we did a couple of months ago, thanks to some fascinating new research that's basically cracked the code on what makes someone cool. So today we're going to take you through what scientists learned after examining almost 6,000 people across 13 countries as they endeavored to figure out the difference between being cool and being good, and they're not the same thing. Now, just before we get into today's podcast, all about how to be cool and the science behind cool, it would be super cool if you press subscribe on this video. We're trying to grow our audience on YouTube as big as we can. It means we can keep creating awesome content for you. Now let's get to today's podcast.
Sam, I think we should say from the outset that this isn't the typical kind of TDA explainer, but it is a Friday, and it has been 2 weeks or even more of a pretty heavy news cycle, and so we thought it's a perfect time to do something a little bit different.
And in terms of, the thoughts that we always go through is who can explain this the best because they know the most about the topic. So sensibly it was that it should be me explaining the cool factor.
And I hope that arrogance is right up there with what makes someone cool.
Not too far away.
Okay, so before we get into what this study found, do you want to walk us through how the scientists who did this, how did they actually go about determining what makes someone cool or not? Because it's such an intangible or subjective thing to assess.
You would think so. They've managed to really boil it down. So they're researchers from Chile and the US, and they surveyed almost 6,000 people across 13 countries, including Australia. And they didn't ask people to rate celebrities or influencers. That was my first thought, was who are the coolest people you know? Instead, they asked them to think of someone they personally knew who was either cool, not cool, good, or not good. Then they rated that person on 15 different personality traits and values using psychology scales that are already in use. And they've kind of brought all of that data together to make a recipe for cool.
That's so interesting. Did they find that different cultures had different ideas of what makes someone cool?
I mean, even you and I have different ideas about what makes someone cool, because you said the word arrogant before. I really don't quite understand why you said that. Look, the researchers exactly expected there to be this massive cultural and global difference. And that's why they deliberately chose countries from 6 different continents with really different cultural values. So they picked some countries that they described as having individualistic cultures like Australia and the US versus what they described as more collective cultures like China and South Korea.
Can you explain that more? Because I would say that Australia and the US, I don't know if I would describe them as individual cultures.
Well, the basic rule that they've used here is whether it's a highly capitalist society and everybody's kind of pursuing success individually and trying to make as much money as they can and get far ahead.
I see. So that's Australia and US.
Exactly. Or you've got cultures that have more kind of communist or socialist structures in government, different ways that they structure their taxation systems or schools or health, all that kind of stuff. But the cool thing here, get it?
I get it.
is that the results across the world were almost identical.
That's so interesting. So it kind of found that exactly what makes someone cool in Australia is very similar to what makes someone cool in China.
Exactly. There are the same character traits of cool people all over the world. And they basically boiled it down to 6 key traits.
So this is the key headline. These are the 6 traits that if you carry these traits, then you're certified cool.
I want everyone to think of themselves in their mind and be ticking things off as I read them out.
Okay.
Being more extroverted, hedonistic, powerful, adventurous, open-minded, and autonomous.
That's quite the mix.
And the researchers said the pattern was so consistent that they could not find cases in which certain regions showed a systematically different pattern.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It is so interesting.
Okay, let's go through each of those characteristics.
Okay, so extroverted basically means that they're outgoing, they speak up, they project energy and excitement. Hedonistic means they seek out pleasure and enjoyment. They're the ones suggesting a spontaneous road trip or trying a weird new different flavor of ice cream.
And it's kind of like they seek out that pleasure over something like pain.
and over something that they're really familiar with as well. And powerful means they've got influence and command attention, not necessarily through a position of authority or something that they are given, but through their presence and through them kind of pushing into rooms they're not meant to be in. Adventurous is about pursuing novelty and taking calculated risks. Open means they're receptive to new ideas and experiences. And autonomous, which I think is a really big one, means they do things their way without asking for permission, and they're very self-directed. So yeah, it's basically me.
They are basically you, some more than others. I would say you've got the autonomous one ticked off.
Thank you.
When I think of you, I think of autonomous.
Thank you so much. For everyone listening, what Billi means to say is that I tend to just go a bit rogue.
But that's okay. We're working on it, aren't we?
We are. Thank you so much.
Okay. And then earlier you said that this research wasn't only looking at what makes someone cool, it also looked at what makes a good person.
And they're different.
And they are different. What were the traits of someone who is good?
So a good person was rated as more conforming, traditional, secure, warm, agreeable, caring about everyone equally, conscientious, and calm. So if you think about it, cool people are the ones who break the rules, who seek new experiences, and who challenge authority. And good people are the ones who follow social norms, they're caring for other people, and they maintain stability.
And does this differ at all between generations?
It does. So baby boomers defined cool as just pure rebellion. Gen X was worried about working hard and playing hard and more of that adventurous streak coming through. Millennials prioritized experiences and social consciousness, so standing up for what you believe in. And Gen Z has made authenticity a really central aspect of coolness. So for Gen Z, being genuine about your struggles and values is actually cooler than just being rebellious for the sake of being rebellious.
That's so interesting. I wonder how much of social media and kind of how curated everyone's life became with the rise of social media has then played into now kind of the opposite of that being authenticity. Playing into that?
Well, I was really thinking about influencers a lot during that part of the research. The report didn't address influencers directly, but I'm cool, so here's my take on it. Social media has basically become a coolness competition in that way. And if we think about those traits that the research says make someone cool, so adventurous, autonomous, open to new experiences, that's the content that does really well on social media. And there's also, though, this tension because Gen Z really values that authentic streak. And they can spot when somebody's trying too hard to be cool versus when somebody's really embodying the traits.
Yes, I feel like you can. I know exactly what you are talking about, but it's kind of hard to talk about without sounding mean because it sounds mean saying that you can think of someone who tries too hard to be cool.
Well, that's exactly kind of what the research was outlining is that it needs to be a natural streak rather than a forced effort.
Where did this whole concept of being cool even come from?
I was so interested in this part of the research. They traced the historic origins of the word cool, and they traced it back to African American jazz culture in the 40s, where musicians used it to describe someone who was, in their words, emotionally restrained, but also rebellious and creative. And then they say by the 60s, it had spread to youth counterculture across the US. And according to the research, even in countries with completely different alphabets and languages, like South Korea or Turkey, people use the English word for cool and pronounce it similarly to how you say it in English. So it's maintained this kind of global meaning, but also this global language aspect of it too. It's super interesting.
So it started in jazz clubs and it's kind of gone everywhere. This might be a silly questions, no silly questions, haha. But why do you think that we care so much about being cool? Is it just because we equate it to being liked?
Well, researchers say that it serves a really important social function. And we look to cool people to be cultural innovators. They're the ones who are pushing boundaries. They're creating new trends. They're creating new art or music or film. They're driving society forward. And in economies that really rely on creativity and innovation, coolness has kind of become this status where people who take risks and who drive change are really rewarded for that.
That's so interesting. So this idea that kind of innovators or risk takers are definitely more in the cool basket.
Yeah, which we shouldn't take for granted. I mean, that's kind of a cultural decision we've made.
Yeah.
Is
Although that's not one of the 6 traits.
Well, it's not directly, but the idea of being adventurous or being outside the norms or being confident and outspoken, all of those kind of lend themselves to creation of new things.
Okay, and I guess when I'm hearing this, one thing that I'm wondering is, I get what researchers are saying is a cool person and what they are saying is a good person. And I feel like they're kind of saying that those are 2 different things.
Yeah.
But can you be cool and good?
Well, the research says that you can be both. Some people are both, but there's particular issues that arise when the 2 conflict. And so what they mean by that is, there's this quote, it says, to be seen as cool, someone usually needs to be somewhat likable or admirable, which makes them similar to good people. However, cool people often have other traits that aren't necessarily considered good in a moral sense. So if you think about like an anti-hero on film or TV, they're not seen as cool because they're conventionally good. There might be, somebody who's in prison for something terrible that they've done. We think they're a really cool character, but they've committed a crime. And a good person wouldn't have committed a crime because they're conforming, traditional, follow the rules. So I actually thought about tech bros, like the really big kind of tech leaders of our world.
Yeah.
They're considered cool by a lot of these metrics. I don't know if they're considered good though.
Yeah, interesting. Are they considered cool?
I think so.
By you. But like if we think of like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
He's a tech bro.
Yeah.
I don't know if people would consider him cool. Maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah. Look, I think that
it's shifted.
His entrance into politics in the last 12 months has really shifted. But even if you go back only 18 months ago before his involvement with US politics, I'd say he pretty neatly did actually fit a lot of this criteria.
Okay, Sam, before we go, I know you've already said that you think that tech bros are cool, but do you have anyone else who you think really embodies these characteristics? I personally have 2 in my mind.
Can you go first to give me a sec to think? Who do you think's cool?
Okay. Of these traits, I think my answers are really basic. Just a warning.
Okay.
Rihanna.
Interesting.
I think that she's got the autonomy, she has the powerful, the adventurous, the hedonistic, like kind of going with pleasure. I feel like she hasn't put out music in a while. She's kind of just choosing to kind of take a step back.
Yeah.
Although she does have the makeup company. But anyway, I think she's very cool based on these traits. And Harry Styles. So basic, but
they're great examples of, I think, universally known cool people.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I guess just things keep coming back to me.
Sam!
Like it just keeps coming back to, I think I'm the coolest person I know. No. And you know what's interesting about it though is that I'm constantly teased in the office for not being cool.
Who teases you?
Oh, every time.
Drop their handle.
Every day there's, that's not cool to wear, and you have glasses and an asthma puffer.
Sam, you're making yourself the victim, and that's not cool.
Maybe.
Okay, I think we will end it there. You are very cool, and I'll
you.
make sure that when we get out of the studio that everyone tells you how cool you are.
What's cooler than being cool? You guys listening at home. Have a beautiful weekend, everybody. We're going to be back in the afternoon with some headlines.
Wait, before we go, you haven't said anything about whether or not you think I'm cool.
I think you're good.
Oh, what? Why?
All right, that's enough.
I hate this. Wait, that's so rude. And you said you're the victim.